like, you know.
Is the volume not going up through the?
Is that better? It makes no difference. Okay. Yeah, wait a second, recording.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm trying to make sure I get the sound up through the projector.
All right.
Working on that. I had it up through the projector earlier, naturally.
Okay.
Okay. I was just playing YouTube at perfect volume. And now
Okay. Now it's not working.
coming through the laptop, but not the projector.
That
Yeah,
is a problem.
of course. Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna call Paul. Whoops. Oh, please. Oh, there we go. All right.
Maybe we should have had Paul from the beginning.
Here we go, I think.
Using picture Paul just.
I see you're in your studio today.
I am. In fact, I think I've been in my studio every time, haven't I?
No way. Now I lost all. Oh no. What did I do? There we go, stimulus system. Sorry for the hassle.
Not at all. Don't worry. I'll just answer some emails. We're always spending our life doing.
All right. I'm calling Paul.
Hey guys.
No. Don't feel bad. He's looking down. Can you imagine Paul, the IT guy?
YouTube volume yesterday, but now it won't come through the projector perfectly. I'm wondering if you got a couple of minutes to swing through the community room. You're the man. Bye. Yes. He'll
You
come.
give me a shot when you're ready. I'll just do something on my big computer for a second.
Okay. Look at all these options here. MacBook Air speakers. How did that happen? It's the way to go, though. It's the way to be, I think. Sorry, everyone. Don't mean to waste your time. Certainly not his. Pause the recording here, shall we? Well, good to catch up a bit. Good to see you again. It's always an honor. And we're going to start off with her name's Marin Hundy, and she's an awesome kid. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
I wanted to ask, how do you overcome writer's block?
By not having it. I've never had writer's block, to be honest, so I wouldn't know how to overcome it. And but I mean, we have I think writers have minor writer's block, like you're stuck on something, which is usually an indication that you need to work on it some more. To that, there's many solutions. One of the easiest one that people don't think of is just to walk away. If you have writer's block over something, just literally walk away from your problem. Get up from your computer and leave it for a few minutes, a few hours, a day, and usually when you'll come back, your mind will be refreshed and the problem will solve itself. Usually writer's block is not so much writer's block, but writer's problem. There's something wrong with your narrative and you don't have the solution yet. So you just have to find that solution. And in the worst case, it means you're working on the wrong story and you have to drop the story and start a new one. But in my case, I haven't written that many books, and I take my time and I resolve problems slowly as they go. So as I said, the easiest solution I find for me is just walking away, letting it go, and then usually a solution will appear before I get back to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Thomas Risty.
Hello, Thomas.
All right, so why do you make specific decisions when you make your novels? Like, for example, like characters' origins. Like, why is Pi from India? Why is, Beatrice and Virgil, why are they a donkey and a monkey?
Good question. Well, those all are essential parts of the story. So, why is pie Indian? Well, in one way, I happened to be in India when I thought of this story. I was backpacking around India. And the story, in some ways, reflects the Indian religious character. Hinduism is kind of like English. English accepts words from all over. English is remarkably unpuritanical. It'll take any foreign word that it likes and turn it into English. So English is peppered with French, German, Spanish, Indonesian, all kinds of words come from other languages and are integrated into it, which, for example, is not the habit of French. French tends to reject foreign words. And if it really has to take the word, it'll try to turn into the French equivalent. And only very unwillingly will it actually accept a foreign word into it. So Hinduism tends to be more like English. It'll swallow up other religions. So it's much more tolerant of diversity. So to have a character who practices 3 religions, which I did because I wanted Pi not so much Life of Pi to be an examination of organized religion, but more a look at faith, which is at the heart of every religion. And so I didn't want to be one single faith, because then the faith and the organized religion will be held to be equivalent. Whereas if you practice 3, well, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, the organized parts of that would be relativized, and I can focus on faith. So that Pi was Indian was sort of essential to the book. As for Beatrice and Virgil, I chose those animals in terms of their symbolic resonance. We tend to think of donkeys as being stubborn. We tend to think of monkeys as being very clever. And in a very sort of simple, symbolic way, that's how we might characterize Jews. Jews are traditionally very clever people, very bookish people. They're people of the book. And they've overaccomplished in so many fields of life: music, science, philosophy. So they're clever, they're monkeyish in that positive sense, and they're also remarkably stubborn. They don't give up on things. So I wanted a symbol for them, and so that was the easiest one. We tend to take animals and see one single trait in them, and I use that in Life of Pi too. Why I chose the 4 animals of Life of Pi was what they sort of symbolized. The orangutan, the primates are held to be maternal, tigers are held to be ferocious, etc. So each of those were a creative choice that was consequential to the story. And going back to that first question, if something didn't work, then I have to go back and change it. So to go back to the example of the animals, initially Richard Parker wasn't going to be a tiger. He's going to be initially an elephant and then a rhino, and each one didn't work, had a problem. So I finally changed it to tiger for Richard Parker. So there's an example of my mini writer's block. I walked away, came back, changed it, and then I finally chose the tiger because I needed something to represent Pi himself potentially in these 2 parallel stories. So I said each choice was made because it was relevant to the story, and if I didn't resolve it, the story couldn't move forward.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
What gave you idea or inspiration to create an allegory about the Holocaust?
Well, interest. I'm not Jewish. I'm not German. I'm not Polish. I'm not French. I'm distantly European, like we all are. But my family on both sides immigrated to Canada, to Quebec, 300 years ago. So certainly no personal connection to the Holocaust. But when I was a kid, I lived for a number of years, for 4 years in Paris as a kid in France. My parents were diplomats. They represented Canada, worked at the Canadian Embassy in Paris. And I went to a British school, and we were taught things, and we were taught history, mainly British history because it was a British school. But along the way, they taught us the world wars that afflicted Europe and the world. And, one of the events of the Second World War, one of the parallel events was this thing called the Holocaust. And whereas previous lessons on tremendous social violence all sort of fit into the same box, you start reading about wars, they're kind of all the same, right? They kind of have the same structure. You have armies with generals and colonels and soldiers. You have battles. You have opposing forces. You have truces. They're kind of all the same. You change the weaponry, you change the characters, but the reason for them always remains the same: rivalry, usually commercial rivalry, maybe rivalry for land. There's a certain similarity. You study one war, you study many wars, you start getting it. They're remarkably similar. Well, and you can do a lot with war. You can play with war. I mean, when I was a boy, we still played war. You pretend to have a gun, you pretend to shoot your friend, and you played war. It was a fun game. Well, then they taught us the Holocaust, and the Holocaust didn't seem to fit. I didn't quite get it. Like usually in a war, you have an enemy, and usually your enemy might look different, but if he didn't look different, he would certainly sound different. The enemy would speak a different language, would perhaps have a different religion, would come from a different land. Whereas in the Holocaust, they're all Germans. Okay, some are non-Jewish and some are Jewish. They all look the same. They all sort of talk the same. Some were civilian. They're all civilians. I didn't quite understand. There was this important distinction of being a Jew, which didn't to me particularly, so what if they're Jewish? It didn't seem to make them heinous in any sort of way. So I just remember as a kid, in a very childish way, not getting it. Whereas I can get all the other wars, I didn't get the Holocaust. And it was still very interesting because it was tremendously violent, which makes it sort of interesting. And it was horrifying, like war is. And it just stayed with me. So as I was growing up, I would periodically, see the kind of movies that would be about the Holocaust, Schindler's List, that sort of thing. Read the kinds of books about it that would be suddenly come out. As a kid, I read The Diary of Anne Frank, for example, Primo Levi. I'd periodically read these Holocaust, so quote unquote, writers. And it was always sort of puzzling me as to, I couldn't figure it out. It's not a question I couldn't figure out hate. But there's something about the Holocaust that would always puzzle me. So when I finished Life of Pi and I had to write another book, I said, well, since I'm interested in this and it puzzles me, that's the very reason why I should write a book about it. And so I started thinking in a more formal way about the Holocaust. And the result was Beatrice and Virgil. And I wanted to write an allegory because one of the things that I noticed quickly, which now in retrospect is quite obvious to me, but it wasn't when I started it, is that most Holocaust stories are all the same. There's a certain homogeneity to Holocaust stories. They're usually either autobiographical or biographical. It's usually historical fiction, or it's usually nonfiction, but if it's fiction, it's usually historical fiction. So, a Holocaust novel will be set usually between 1933 and 1945 in Central or Eastern Europe, featuring Jews, and they're beset by these psychotic haters, whether, formal German Nazis or their many, many collaborators. They're all like that. And I was thinking, where's the variety of points of views? Where are the varieties of genre? So to go back to the example of war, you do have your war stories that feel very documentary-like. Saving Private Ryan, for example. Saving Private Ryan is set between 33 and 45 in Europe, features the good guys and the bad guys. The Germans speak German. They look like the Germans did at the time. It's all very realistic. That's one approach. But you also have war comedies. You have war romances. You have war, adventure stories. None of those are true to war, but there's still a way to look at war. You don't have that variety with the Holocaust. You certainly don't have Holocaust comedies. You have Life is Beautiful, which a little bit. I just noticed there's a very limited way we discuss the Holocaust. So what do we lose with that? Why do we not have Holocaust comedies? Obviously the Holocaust is a tragedy, but so is war. It doesn't prevent us from having, as I said, war comedies, war romances. So I just said, well, we need to look at that because there's presumably something lost. And I think, in fact, what is lost is not only a variety of how we tell the story, but a variety of reactions. We tend to always react to Holocaust stories in the same way. Gosh, that was sad. 6 million innocents, 1/4 of whom were children. That's really sad. I am sad. And then you move on. And you don't really integrate it into your own life. Whereas war is, I don't know if do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I have one sister.
Right. So you know war. You know war because you have a sister. I'm sure you've had arguments with your sister. That's World War II, writ very, very, very small. We all have war. We know about war. There are political wars. War we all understand. It just means rivalry, competition. Genocide, you don't get. You presume you haven't murdered your sister and you wouldn't want to. That degree of hatred, is really, really weird. And it strikes me if we don't discuss that in as many ways as possible, we're not going to get it. We have to get beyond the sadness. We have to accept the sadness and say, well, what do we do with this? And that's what hasn't been done particularly. So I wanted to write an allegory to sort of say, hey, how can we discuss the Holocaust not in the same old way, to try to extract something out of it, which is why you have those lists in the novel of how to speak of the horrors without speaking about it directly. What are the million, like I have that little gesture, all these kinds of ways to sort of how can we integrate it into our daily life? It's not a question of banalizing it, but we've got to be in touch with that. It's kind of like a vaccination. You got to have a vaccination of that ugliness, so that when the temptation appears before you to demonize another people. For example, in the US, in the southern US, Latinos, immigrants, all these immigrants pouring across the Mexican borders, who are just impoverished people who want a better life, men, women, children who are not criminals, they just want a better life. To make sure we don't demonize them and dehumanize them and murder them, you need to remember the Holocaust. The Germans were not barbarians. They thought themselves the most civilized people in the world, and they descended to this barbarity. It could happen to any of us. So I wanted, the thing about an allegory is a very light way to talk about something very complicated. As I mentioned in the book, Animal Farm by George Orwell is a wonderful light way to discuss Stalinism and what Stalin did to Russia. Indeed, what Putin is doing to Russia right now. You read Animal Farm, you kind of get it, and that's an 80-page novella. So I was trying to do the equivalent with the Holocaust, is give you something that you could carry within you, metaphorical, imaginative, to somehow give you an idea of what to do with that intense hatred and how to somehow prevent it. And I used animals because we tend to be insensitive about the suffering of other human beings sometimes, but people always hate it when animals suffer. If I beat my dog in front of you, you'd be really upset, because we sort of surround animals with sort of innocence. So it was a way to sort of try to make it more emotionally powerful. That was a really long answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. A few of my classmates and I were wondering, why in your book about Beatrice and Virgil did you write just about 4 pages about a pair?
Right, that was at the very beginning of the book. What I wanted to say was that as powerful as words are, they can't capture the reality of things. And I want to take the simplest of examples of a banal fruit. You can describe a fruit for 10 years. You'll never quite capture the reality of it. And so I want to signal that right away with this. Forget trying to capture the Holocaust in words. It'll never happen. Reality, once it's past, vanishes. And sure, we can apply photographs, we can write words, but it'll still be lost. And we have to accept that. But words are still better than nothing. So, once you've lost that pair, once you don't know what a pair is, well, that's it. But an attempt to describe it is still better than nothing. So perhaps if one day you do encounter a pear, you say, oh, that funny little shape, I think that's what someone told me was a pear. And oh yeah, the skin is very thin and it's kind of crunchy and juicy and has sort of surprisingly white flesh. And that must be what a pear is. And you will only know that if you have this poor description of a pear. So that was not so much a description of a pear as a description of the limitations of a language.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Okay, we were wondering, what does creativity do for you on a daily basis? Do you feel the need to remain creative always?
Yes, in a general way. What creativity does for me is that, as far as I can tell, it's the only way to interact with the world, in the sense that we're not computers, we're not robots. We have personalities. We want to have some sort of personal input into the world. And the best way to do that is to be yourself, which in some ways sometimes means conforming. There's some situations when you want to go with the herd. When you're told to get a vaccination, go with the herd. When you're told to stop at a red light, go with the herd. But there's many other instances in life where you want to do your own thing. And the best way to do that is when you really involve yourself creatively. So yeah, I love being a writer because it is creative. Out of nothing, I make something. Out of words that we all share, I make a story that is unique to me. And I've had the luck that other people have shared it with me. And I think that kind of creativity is important at every level. It's not all about high art, writing novels, paintings, writing symphonies, the way we dress, the way we cook, the way we interact with people, all those can be reflections of who we are as individuals. And to accentuate that, I think it's just a source of happiness. Someone who, there's no triumph in anyone saying, oh, I'm not at all creative. I think sometimes people tell me that, when they're talking about writing. That's totally fine. Not everyone either can or even wants to write a novel. If you ask me about dance, I'm totally uncreative when it comes to dancing. I'm not really creative when it comes to cooking. And I accept that. That's fine. That's not who I am. That's not my skill set. I think each of us has to find their skill set and develop that creativity. And it's not a question of being, best in the world. It's just in your own quiet way, being yourself and making something of that. Because frankly, that's the only life you're going to have is your own. So you might as well make the best of that. And I think that involves exploring the world through travel, through books, and exploring yourself, discovering who am I? What do I want to do? What fulfills me? What makes for a good life? And I think creativity, and you can interpret that in many ways, is an essential part of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, so you kind of already answered the question I was going to ask you about, like, what do the other animals mean in Life of Pi? So our teacher wants to ask what your new book is about, the one that you were writing where you had to wait for your editor or something.
But yeah, well, I have two books I'm writing. I'm writing this Trojan War novel inspired by Homer's Iliad. The Iliad and the Odyssey are quite literally the first two books of the West. If you had a big, huge bookshelf and in it you had, the books all in order by which when they appeared. So, Life of Pi came out in 2001. Shakespeare's Hamlet came out in 1608. If you kept on going backwards like that, the very, very, very first book in your bookshelf, literally the first book in there would be the Iliad. The Greeks rediscovered writing around the 700s, the 8th century before Christ. And they discovered this really powerful tool, these 26 Greek letters. Oh, we can write things down and remember things. We don't have to just keep on saying it. And the first extended thing they wrote down was the Iliad, which was this centuries old story of this famous war between the Greeks and the Trojan, a mythical war that had taken place around 1000 BC. The first story, 800 BC, the first story they wrote down was this story of this war. And I read it a few years ago, and it blew me away. I thought it'd be this dusty old classic, a little bit boring. Not at all. It's like Game of Thrones. It's really, really, in a good translation, it's an incredible story. And so that inspired me to write this story about this commoner in the war and his view of the war. And it parallels the story of the scholar who discovers this lost Trojan War tradition. Anyway, it's quite an involved novel. And I finished it, and the editorial process is very slow. So at one point, I had a 4-month gap in which one of my editors, I was waiting for her to read the book. And while I was twiddling my thumbs, I had a look at my mother. My mother's 83, and she has Alzheimer's, and she's sort of losing her mind. She has no short-term memory, literally none. She forgets things within 5 seconds. And there's something about that struck me. And so I wrote a book inspired by my mother's Alzheimer's. It's not a memoir. I'm not interested in writing about my own little life, my own mother and her little thing. But you know how you read a book, every single book you've written has been bound, right? The very definition of a book for you is this bound product. And there's pages 1 and there's page, let's say, well, Life of Pi, I think is 316 pages, and those are all bound together. And they're numbered 1 to 316. And the implication there, and it'll seem obvious to you, is when you open a book, you start on page 1 and you keep on reading until you get to page 316. You'd be a very unusual reader if you opened up the book and first read page 52, and then went to page 88, and then went to page 4, and then went to page 291, and then went to page 76. You can do that, but that would be a very, very unusual way of reading. And the author puts the pages in a numbered order because that's the way he or she wants you to read the story. And so I sort of thought, with my mother losing her mind, losing her memory, in a sense, the book of her life is becoming unbound, and the pages are no longer 1 to 316. So I thought to myself, that's kind of interesting. She's losing the plot, literally, figuratively. So that suddenly got me thinking, so my next book, and my publishers are going to hate this, I want it to be published in a box, let's say, like this. It'll be like a box. It won't be a regular book with binding, and you open it like this. It'll be in a box, and you'll open the box, and you're going to have 52 chapters. Same number of weeks in a year, same number of cards in a deck of cards. And there'll be these little booklets, some as short as 1 page, like one front of a page, some maybe 2, some as much as maybe 14 pages. And each will be bound, but there'll be no order. It'll be a book you can read in any order you want. And the box will help you keep them together. And there'll be a little note on the left side as you open the box that says, this is a novel you can read in any order. You can shuffle it literally like a deck of cards if you want, and you can read them in any order. And so the fun thing of that is that, so I'm breaking with linearity. I'm breaking with the idea that life starts when you're 0, when you die when you're 80. That's certainly the fact of the case chronologically, physically, but not mentally. If you think about memories, you can jump to the past, pause at the future. Our memories do not work in a linear fashion. So I want this book to reflect that. So yeah, it'll be a book that you can read in any order, because I want to deliberately lose that order and see what the result is. And part of it accounts for someone who has Alzheimer's, but it goes way beyond that. It's a lot more than a memoir. It really is a piece of work. And each of those little chapters will have one single sentence, a very long sentence, except for one chapter, which will have some that'll have discrete sentences. Anyway, it's quite experimental. I have to say, I've never written something so quickly. I usually do a lot of research for my books. Life of Pi research about zoology, zookeeping, animal biology, animal behavior, shipwrecks, religions. The Holocaust one, lots of research on the Holocaust. This one, I didn't really have to do research because I was kind of inspired by my mother, who was right in front of me. And so 86,000 words poured out in 3 months. I've never written something so quickly. And so that'll be the next one. Let's see if my publishers like it. But I have to say, in my own mind, it's really, really thrilling to sort of try to do something completely new. There's something quite thrilling about that. And sometimes you try something new and it doesn't work. And in this case, it really worked in my mind. It's really a really fun thing, because precisely because you can start anywhere, every single one has to be like a micro novel. Every single one of those mini chapters doesn't have to have a beginning, middle, and end, but like any good story, it has to have something that grips you, something that stays with you, either because it's satisfying in itself, or because it has a hook at the end that makes you, hey, what's going to happen next? And the hooks have to be in any sort of, they have to happen in different orders. So anyway, it's in my mind, it's a really, really interesting book, and we'll see if people like the idea of having a book that doesn't have any binding.
Well, like the order that like you read it in, will it change the meaning of your book, do you think? Like, are they all going to come like the same order? You can like mix it up.
Well, as I say in the little introduction, it'll be the same story, only differently told. What will happen, for example, and you have lots of stories that are like that. You have some stories that begin with the end. You have a story that might start, today my father died. And there'll be a little account of the death of your father, and then the next chapter will go back, 3 years earlier, my father and I were catching a bus to go somewhere, whatever. You have stories told in many different ways, some of which jump into the future, then go back into the past. So I think once you've read them all, you'll get to the same destination, but you'll get there by different means, depending on what order you read things. So yeah, in some cases you'll read something and the character's mother will already be dead. And then you'll start another one, will be before she died. But depending on the order, you may read the run up to her death and then her death, or you may read about her death and then the run up to it. But either way, she dies. And many of the other things too will, sometimes there are certain things mentioned in one booklet that are answered in another. So for example, at one point I quote a Hollywood star saying something. I just said, what movie star said this? And it's only in a separate chapter that I just say, oh, it was Judy Garland. Now, if you read the Judy Garland, it'll just say, it was Judy Garland. And you'll say, why is he mentioning Judy Garland? And later on, you'll read the one about the Hollywood movie star and say, oh, that's Judy Garland. Whereas if you read them in a different order, you'll get the question first and then the answer. So ultimately, it'll be the same story, but as I said, differently told with different effects on your mind. So, you know, in a sense, it's exactly like a game of cards. You play Uno, you mix the cards, you're playing the same game, but in a sense, every time it's different. But you get to the same conclusion. You get a winner or a loser. So it's in my mind, it's been really interesting playing with it. And the difficulty with my publisher is that it'll feel like a gimmick to them. It'll really feel like some sort of novelty item, and it's not at all what I intend. I want to say, you know, look at this is a really interesting way of telling a story. Give it a try. So that's why each of the little chapters has to be interesting. Whatever one you take has to say, huh, this is interesting. I want to keep on going.
Right. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Hi,
Hello.
my question is, why did you choose to write about other cultures and religious practices?
I guess because I've traveled a lot in my life. As I mentioned earlier, my parents, we lived in France, but we also lived in Costa Rica, in Mexico, in Spain. So they were working for what would be the equivalent of the Department of State in the US. They worked for the equivalent here in Canada. And so as a kid, I was moved to different countries, saw different cultures. And, you know, otherness starts to disappear, you know, once you travel. I mean, yes, Spain is an other country, I guess, and so is France. But having spent time in both, their otherness doesn't seem quite so other. You know, I lived a year in Mexico, and that was a very rich year. So it doesn't seem so other anymore. You know, these boundaries blur. Any otherness starts to blur once you get to know the other. So once I grew up, I continued traveling, backpacking in Europe, in South America, in India, in Iran. I love traveling. And so I guess that's my writing is naturally a reflection of that. The world's a really interesting, beautiful place. I love where I live, Saskatchewan. I'm sure South Dakota is a beautiful, lovely place too. But there are other places too. And often you will appreciate where you live more if you realize that there are other ways of living too. It might help you improve where you live now, but you also may realize, well, this what we have is better than what they have. So, you know, so yeah, to me, the otherness ultimately brings you back home. So my novel set in India. I don't presume any of you are Indian or have even been to India, but hopefully in reading Life of Pi, it brought you to India so that ultimately you come back home enriched, as you do with the trip. And the same thing with Beecher and Virgil, hopefully reading about monkeys and donkeys and being on this big shirt wasn't so alien after all, but in fact was about you. So, you know, travel is a metaphor. Travel it seems to be about something, but in fact, it's just a mirror reflecting who we are. And I just find exotic settings, which I never write of for the sake of exoticism, because they just spoke to me. India is an amazing, amazing country. They speak, you know, I think 200 languages. It's so, so unbelievably varied. And it's lively and it's in your face. And nearly anyone with a speck of education speaks English. So it's also accessible. You can actually talk to them and they can speak to you. And they're very curious. They're very curious about foreigners. So it's just a really, really lively, lively place. And that's really stimulated me. And I generally find travels like that. And then I come home and I write about it. I bubble away in my imagination writing my stories. And then I have a year and just do it again. But it's never a denial of, you know, I don't write about the exotic because I don't like what's at home. It's a question of getting that right balance. So that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right.
Hello?
So you said for a lot of your books, you do a lot of research for like Life of Pi, you had to research shipwrecks and animals and other things like that. How much do you have to study the psychology of people just to be able to get it like just kind of right?
Huh. Well, I guess psychology, the mind being an integral part of everything human, as you research, you understand that too. So just take the example of Life of Pi and the religious element. In reading about Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, you start to get it. You read about those religions, you start to get what they're saying. Because after all, everything human will echo the human. There's nothing so alien that is human that you wouldn't get it. You just have to make the effort of understanding it. And that could involve opening your heart, could be involve opening your mind. But once you make that effort, you will get it, including psychologically. And all religions, just to look at that aspect, all religions have a plausible psychological element. The only elements of religion that are not psychologically plausible are extremism. Extremists don't usually last. They usually go crazy, or they leave extremism, because that's not psychologically plausible. Extremists who hate, there's not much hating you can do before it poisons your life. And so those they could live their whole life like that, but then they really die miserable human beings. But either they kill themselves or kill someone else, or they just give up. They say, wait, I can't do this, is crazy. And they just give it up. It can be very difficult if you're born in it, for example. Like I hate the children of Hamas terrorists. What a terrible way to grow up, with parents who are completely fanaticized. But otherwise, I said the psychology comes with everything else. The way people dress, the way people eat, that's all of a part with the way they think. So I guess it's all a question of intuition, empathy, openness, and you start to get it. And that's, I meant the road job. But the same thing with languages, with cultures. Once you're in a place, especially once you're there, you start to get it more. You start to get how people are once you're there. It's slightly harder when you're not there. So to understand how Indians are, or Iranians, or Mexicans is much easier once you actually go there, or read a lot of their books, for example. But once you do that, you tend to get it, and it becomes part and parcel of what you're writing, and you sort of just get it. So I can't say I specifically thought in terms of the psychology of Pi or the psychology of Beatrice. It was just all part of a package that came together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks again very much, Yann. We're going to use this. We're going to react to this in essays, and just keep rolling here. It's a tricky time of their senior year where the end is in sight, but it's not quite grabbable. So it's major to have you visit with us.
Okay, wonderful, Matt. No problems. Good luck, guys, with your essays and finishing high school. And well, I'll see you next year, Matt.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Have a good day, guys.
Take care. You too.